we are actually too poor in India that we do not discuss religion in universities. Because if you go to Cambridge, if you go to Oxford, I mean, I'm not saying that they are great by definition, but I'm saying these are the great institutions that the left thinks are great. Okay, you take Princeton, you take Harvard, you take Stanford, wherever, you will always have departments of divinity studies or you will have departments of religion studies. It's only in India that we don't have these. Okay, as a result of this, you can have this sort of a poster, okay, where obviously a tall politician is being depicted as Krishna. But he is Krishna, there's no doubt about it, because notice that peacock feather on his crown. Okay, the Gita is in his left hand. He's holding the lotus in his hand, and he's twirling the parliament with his right index finger, and he's stepping on human skulls, which is I was actually very surprised that only this sort of an interpretation of the Gita is possible in JNU. Namaste to all of you who are here. I am Arunoday Majumdar, and I'm going to talk about why I left leftism in JNU. Uh, as the topic itself, the title of the talk, as it suggests, it is going to be somewhat of a personal talk because I'm going to share that how I had a decade long association with independent left movement in India, and particularly from Calcutta and in Calcutta and Delhi. And then, a more general and a more impersonal view of what leftism in India is and how it needs to be encountered by those who do not subscribe to its ideologies. Just one thing, I'm not going to treat this as a left right sort of a debate, and in fact, one I'll come. As I progress with the talk, there's a particular moment where I'm going to say that you know we should get out of this left right debate, because the left identifies itself as right, and they define anybody who is not left as right. But do we define ourselves as right? That's an important question that we need to ask. And I don't think we should let others define what we are. So, with that, I think I'm going to start with. So, what I've done is I have, in this slide, I'll quickly introduce you to the talk structure. That is how I've structured my talk. And as you would remember, the title of this talk is Why I Left Leftism in JNU. So, the first part is going to be a personal account of who is the I, who am I, and how did I get, how was I, attracted to leftism, and how did I get involved in it. The next is a note on why. Why did I leave? Okay, that's the next part of it. The third is what after I left. What did I do after I leave? What am I still doing after I have left? And fourth is a note on leftism in Bharat India. That is a note on leftism and what are the broader things it actually stands for, whether it's Orientalism, modernism that I call, what are its relations with colonialism and neo-colonialism. These are the things that I take up at the fourth part. That's slightly more technical, but I'm sure that we have a very august audience who is used to these terms and will be able to educate me on it when we have the Q&A session as well. So I'll start with who the I is and give you a brief introduction about who am I and how did I get introduced to leftism. So I grew up actually in a family in Calcutta, and as it used to be, I was growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s when the left front rule was pretty much, on top at the pinnacle in West Bengal, and nobody thought that they are going to go anywhere until, they made certain mistakes. So, there was great family influence. This is how it actually begins. There was great family influence in the sense that on my maternal side, I had my uncles who were like members of the party, okay, who were trade unionists and who were there in the education system. My mother herself was a very strong supporter of the Communist Party of India. And on my paternal side, I grew up in a joint family. So not in the traditional sense of the joint family where you all stay together and share the hearth, but it was more like separate households, but you had regular contact and regular interaction. So I grew up in such a family, and I had one of my grandfathers, I mean my own granddad's brother, and then one of my grandmothers, okay, who were not only very staunchly left, but were also one of them was also pretty much I wouldn't say a Naxal sympathizer, but pretty much involved, let's say, at least in the discourse that surrounded Naxalism, the romance of Naxalism, particularly at that time. So as a young boy who was growing up, these were the influences that I was coming across, and it was, I mean, it's not that I look back upon them with rejection or with a deep sense of regret. It's not that, because you are socialized as someone who grows up in such a family, okay, to look at it positively. I mean, you of course don't get to know about the Stalins and the Maos and their cultural revolutions and the gulags. You don't get to know about those because these are left out of the talks. I mean, I wonder even if they themselves remember it, or if they themselves know it. Of course, the ones who are professors would probably know. But my uncle is a professor of the natural sciences. I don't think, even if he knew, he has forgotten by now, or he has made himself forget these unsavory things. But that is the growing up part, and so much so that for my first election that I voted, I actually remember, and I think I can say I actually voted for a red party. So nothing surprising about that, because it was my first vote, and it usually comes not very politically conscious, just out of school. Okay, not even into college. I remember it was that moment when I voted for the first time, and that's when I voted actually red. And I'll now take you to way back. This was in 2004, and I'll now take you to 2010 when I actually arrived in New Delhi, and I found something which is more liberal. Again, I have relatives, I have friends in New Delhi, and I came across this large number of people. Okay, where there was a distinct change. Okay, and they were absolutely anti communism. Although left liberal, it goes together these days, and there are reasons why it does, which I'll lay down in the end of my talk. But at that point in time, I met a completely new set of people, okay, with whom I was hanging out, with who would influence me. And these set of people were literally liberal. And what do I mean by liberal? It meant that, number one, okay, they were strong pro-market people. They wanted the state get out. Classical distinction between left and liberal is what defined them. So they were definitely someone who wanted the market to take over. They were absolutely happy with liberalization, privatization, and globalization, not critics of it. And more importantly, their sense of culture, or their sense of what is it to be culturally sound, would always look towards the West. So you had to. So when I was in Delhi, I actually picked up learning English music, because I knew very little of it. Okay, so I only knew by Brian Adams and Enrique Iglesias and all of that. But then I had to, in order to fit into the new crowd that I was meeting, I had to know about the rest of the people. Okay, so like the favorite used to be Pink Floyd and Metallica and all these people. So, but there was almost a peer pressure, okay, to be that sort of a thing. So this is basically how I experienced both. When I was growing up, I experienced both the leftist side of the things, and when I came to Delhi, I experienced what would one say, a bit more of a breathing space, a little bit of a liberal space, where you were experimenting with new things, but obviously, okay, I mean, you still didn't know the underlines of these things, okay. And one of the reasons why my leftism, my 10-year or even 12 years from 18 almost to the age of 30, why I was very connected to leftism was also because of the educational institutions that I attended, and I would like to go to the next slide for this, um, so that I can tell you, yeah, okay, who is the I is actually the first slide where I just took you through, growing up in a communist Kolkata and what my maternal family and paternal family's influences were. Then a move to family and friends, in liberal New Delhi. That's what the thing was. But in the middle, okay, I just want to talk a bit about the educational institutions and the workplaces that I attended and what was the impact of that on my my structure of intellectual development. Okay, so the first name would not surprise. I went to Presidency College for my undergraduate degree. A lot of you would know it not only for its academic excellence, but also because of the fact that it was also the birthplace in many ways of urban Naxalism. It started in a village close to Darjeeling called Naxalbari, but the fact that it took over, and spread through urban West Bengal was because of the contributions, so to say, of a few colleges, Presidency College being one of them. So I graduated from there, but it's very important at this point in time to make a distinction of the kind of leftism that I was involved in. So you had the Communist Party of India, Marxists, the CPIM, which was in power in West Bengal, and its student wing or Bacha Party, like I say, every big political party has their student wings, right? So the student wing of theirs is the SFI, or the Students Federation of India. I was never a part of that. In fact, we were strongly opposed to this sort of state backed communism, and we had our own independence. Consolidation was a small party that we had, and it was we focused on pluralism and leftism. So it was a youthful adventure in the intellectual thought and intellectual action. And I fought the elections. I even had to stay underground when I won along with my friends, because the SFI would always try to capture us and not let us get elected on the day that you had to present yourself on in the college. So that was interesting, but I was part of what I call the independent left. Then from there, I went to the Asian College of Journalism, which is deeply, I mean, associated with the Hindu, and the Hindu of Enram's time, not when others had been editors. So Mr. Enram was still the editor. So you can imagine the kind of influence that I was growing up in. So much so that after my journalism diploma, I went and worked with CNN News 18 and Times Now, and actually quit to return to the academia because I thought that this is too capitalist. Okay, so I was that hardcore left that I wanted to. That one of the reasons, in fact, for quitting the media was the reason that this is. I thought that this is too capitalist. It is backed by private money. It's backed by private capital, so it cannot be for people's good. So that is how. What I should say, that is how stereotypical my thinking had become. That is how that is how focused to a very bad degree my intellectual development had become. Although I was a pretty decent student, okay, I was always a very decent student, and I mean, if you are left and if you are hardcore left, you will actually score much more in your examinations and you do very well. So doesn't surprise that I was when I look back, I'm really embarrassed at the kind of things that I thought and the kind of the certainty that I had about the world around me and how it should be. Okay, yeah, so that was that, and I quit and I went to another place, which is the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, for a bit of a research assistance job, and there too things were not different. Okay, so here too you were reading the same old either the Communist Manifesto or the Annihilation of Caste was of course an important text that we were reading at this point in time. But then you really don't get into the problematic portions of the Annihilation of Caste. You've already exalted that book as well to the status of a Communist Manifesto, something that has to be only like 100% page after page only looked at with devotion almost, not look at it, not engage with it critically at all. So, but after that, I went into the Delhi School of Economics, and this is when my stint or my tryst with liberalism actually started. And I was I was upset that I thought, okay, I've come to the Delhi School of Economics to study sociology, and it's not quite Marxist. Why are we talking about post-structuralism and things? Why are we not focused on Marx, and Marx? Okay, so because that was the reason that after my MA and my MPhil that I went to JNU, okay, for my PhD, and because I thought that I needed to be in the mecca of Marxism, because everywhere else Marxism has been spoiled. Okay, it's not being done properly. So I'm sure that if I land up in JNU, I'm going to get the original Marxism and quality Marxism, and I'm going to be able to make a lot out of Marxism there. So with great hope, I landed up in JNU. By the way, just in order to if anyone's listening and if anyone wants to check back on all that I've said, there's Ashoka University now hosts a site called the Hoot, thehoot.org. So if you Google my name and if you Google the Hoot, you will come across my writings between 2010 and let's say 2014, 15, 2010 and 2016, and you will see how Marxist these writings were, primarily, commentary on politics, on education, commentary on the media. And post 2016, that is when I joined JNU, things start changing gradually. And because the things, I actually see things, and they disappoint me even more greatly. And let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to tell you what these things were. So I joined JNU in January 2016, and in February 2016, of course, there was that infamous incident where although let's give the longest hand to the left, and where they claim that slogans such as Bharat Tere Tukde Honge, then and then and then, they were never raised. Okay. So even if we accept that these slogans were never raised, thankfully on that particular day, I was not on campus. I was staying somewhere else because I knew there was trouble. So even if we, give it that, such slogans were raised, I always felt that why is it that people are being so defensive about this? Why don't you say that it's not a matter of whether this was raised or whether this was not raised, whether this was edited by some TV channel or whether it was not edited by TV channel? What is your position on such a slogan? That's the point. Do you condemn it if it was raised, or whether it was raised or not is a different matter altogether? Because there is a certain number of people who say that this was raised, and this, on the face of it, obviously appears to be extremely. It not only appears to be violent, it is also deeply unconstitutional. Right. So I was wondering what the fuss is so much about. Why is it that everybody is trying to say that no, this slogan was not raised, so we don't need to comment on it at all? Okay, so but you are supposed to be JNU. You are supposed to take a stand even at things which are far away in Israel. Okay, so why don't you say something? Okay, which has happened on your own backyard. Okay, so you think that you're talking about Latin America, talking about Israel, and everybody is wrong, but something's happened on in your backyard, and you suddenly say, "Oh, we are not going to talk about it too much because this is not something that this was said, or this was said by outsiders who came from a particular university in Delhi from outside." So I was wondering, why is it that you don't say it? Does it mean that you actually support it but don't want to say it out? So that was one thing that I was wondering about. The second one was, at this point in time, I was still pretty much in touch with my friends, and I was it's not like I had to become somebody different, and I was still not kept at an arm's distance, and I was also mixing with my friends at this point in time. The second one was when something called Azadi Square was set up. I mean, I really think it's I mean, we can talk about it at length. That on some other day there was something called Freedom Square was set up, and some eminent intellectuals came and gave lectures, and they even invited Professor Makaran Paranjpe because he belonged to the other side, which was graceful of them, which is something that they usually don't do, to address the students. And I was surprised and aghast at how he was hooted, how his talk was disrupted again and again and again. And this then started to make me think, because if you go and look at Professor Paranjpe's lecture, or if you read through his lecture, which has now been published. I mean, those JNU lectures have been published, I think, by HarperCollins. I mean, some of the JNU professors got together and published the lecture. You would see that the man makes. I mean, he's a scholar and he makes great sense about what he's talking. So I couldn't really understand why the need to disrupt him, why the need to hoot him, why the need to silence him down. So that was when I started to feel disappointed and dejected at this turn of the left. I kind of thought that well, I came here thinking that I'm going to do the real Marxist stuff. Okay, but the real Marxist stuff doesn't really exist. Okay, it's mostly about a group of people who just don't want to discuss anything other than what they believe to be true. So they suffer from actually an overdose of certainty. That's the problem that I realized. And if you are an intellectual, whether you are an intellectual, or whether you are training to be one, or whether you are a man or a woman who has a job, okay, uh, the point is, each one of us is expected to harbor a certain amount of uncertainty about what I know, because that's precisely where, I mean, that's the engine of knowledge. If you think that you know everything, then your engine of knowledge will not be whirring; it will be jammed, because you already know everything. And this is not only a moral stance. I mean, the nature of knowledge is that it is given to change. So each person knows that what I know today is not the truth, and it's going to change over a period of time. Okay, so I felt that amount of there's an overdose of certainty amongst my friends, and that really ticked me off. Okay, and I really thought that either I need to go alone or I need to find a new bunch of friends. Okay, so which was when in 2016, and now I get into certain things that are not very well known outside JNU. The 2016 February incident is very well known, but in 2016, another thing happened, which was the Iram Sharmila Scholarship, okay, was handed over to the JNUSU, which is the Jawaharlal Nehru University Students Union, by the JNUTA, which is the JNU Teachers Association. And the Iram Sharmila Scholarship has been set up by Professor Nandini Sundar, who is the partner of the Wire's founder, Mr. Siddharth Varadarajan, and who was also one of the organizers of the dismantling Hindutva movement. I have no problems with that. Everybody can organize such a, I call it a movement because it sounds like one. Okay, a conference. It was a conference. The only problem was that there was no other view that was invited in that conference. That's the problem, I think. I mean, whether someone's whatever conference you organize, if you call it an academic conference, then it cannot be of all the same color and whitewashed. Okay, so but here, so this was set up by Professor Nandini Sundar, and who was incidentally my teacher, and I'm respectful towards that relationship, and I'll remain respectful towards that relationship. I mean, she was my teacher in Delhi School of Economics. But what happened was, this scholarship was given to the JNUSU, even though it violated all the rules of the scholarship. Why? Because I mean, the first rule was you had to be an applicant from a zone in India which was under conflict. So it could be a place where the AFSPA is there, okay, technically, or it could be a place which has seen insurgency or terrorism. Okay, so previously people from Jammu and Kashmir had, for instance, got the scholarship, but sitting in New Delhi, how are you under conflict? One doesn't quite know. Second, this was for postgraduate students, whereas JNUSU, even if we go by the membership of JNUSU, JNUSU, first of all, is not an individual, it doesn't qualify as a student. Okay, secondly, even if we look at the structure of JNUSU, it has undergraduate components because the language schools, I mean, French, Chinese, Arabic, whatever is taught, I mean, there are undergrad students as well. So it is not a postgraduate constituent or postgraduate constituency. Thirdly, uh, thirdly and quite importantly, the problem, just a moment. Yeah, the problem with the Iram Sharmila scholarship is that the all these things were changed. Okay, and thirdly, obviously, you had to make an academic contribution in the first place. How does JNUSU make a contribution? I mean, did it submit a paper? Did it conduct some sort of research? We don't know. Okay, so a scholarship was actually given to JNUSU by the, and this is not a thing done by a single professor, but it was handed over to the JNUSU by the JNUTA. Now, how did this happen? Okay, I was very surprised, and I started doing since then what I do, that is to write about all these things. So if you go on the if you as I speak, if you Google and just Arunodaya Majumdar Iram Sharmila scholarship, you'll immediately find that there was a piece that I wrote highlighting this, that how is this that this happens. So we've heard about how the left kind of entrenches itself into the university by not taking into account real scholarship, by only preferring ideological its own ideological followers. It is deeply nepotistic. All right, and here is an open example which nobody has taken account of. Okay, that the 2016 Iram Sharmila scholarship was ratorat made into an Iram Sharmila award and given to JNUSU. How does this happen? Okay, did the JNUSU even apply? That's a question, because the applications had to end by December. Okay, and this award was given sometime in February or March. So how did JNUSU even apply? All right, so this is something that I strongly hope that someone takes this up and actually looks up into this. The next one was actually a Times of India editorial that I wrote, called Lengthy Slogans, Lousy Research, which turned the tide against me. And now I was pretty much there everywhere. Everybody was, not talking to me actually, but talking about me amongst themselves, that here comes someone, okay, who seems to have a good educational background, seems to have been on the left, but is suddenly not behaving like this person is the left. So suddenly you would see people not talking to you. Okay, suddenly you would see your friends not recognizing you. Okay, suddenly you would see, if you are talking to someone, that person, others are looking at that person, so that person has to immediately end the conversation with you and run away. Okay, I'm not saying that I didn't have friends. I had a set of four to five, five to six friends who didn't really bother about these things. But I had a huge group of friends who suddenly stopped talking to me, and doesn't. I mean, I'm not saying that. I'm sad about that. I'm not saying it from that point of view, but I'm saying, how is it that the left actually operates? Okay, by if you dare to question what it says, if you dare to not agree with it. So this Lengthy Slogans, Lousy Research was basically about the Vice Chancellor of JNU, Professor Mamidala Jagdish Kumar, who basically found out that in JNU, some of the professors in some departments had as many as 20 students, were guiding 20 students for their PhDs. Okay, and this is in a sense, I mean, a professor cannot guide 20 students. How do you then ensure the quality of the research that is being produced? But then JNU, frankly, has never been very interested in the quality of research production, but it is more interested in the quantity of cadres that you grow, or the quantity of cadres that you can let out of that factory. So I think that was the reason why not much had been spoken about, in this in this sphere. And then so he brought in that ratio which applies to all universities, that a professor can, to an extent, maximum 8 PhD students you can you can teach. Okay, so the problem, the protests against this in JNU was that seat kam ho jayega. Okay, nobody is bothered about the fact that what happens to research, what happens to the quality of academic excellence that we are supposed to produce. Nobody is bothered about that. What they are bothered about, that the number of seats will drop, okay, and the number of students coming from disadvantaged backgrounds will further be further disadvantaged, although this is completely untrue because the ratio remains unchanged. The ratio of reservation or whatever, that remains unchanged. That you cannot play with. It's just that if you have too many students, it doesn't work. And and along with this, along with this, what was done was that in JNU you went into an MPhil PhD. So what also happened was that JNU previously, during my time, used to offer an MPhil PhD joint program. So when you went in as an MPhil student, if you passed and if you scored a 60%, which by the way is anybody scores a 60% in JNU, that's also a big problem. Okay, whereas if you are in Calcutta University or Delhi University, from where I had come, getting a 60% was really, really, really tough. Okay, I mean, maybe 10% of students in the whole class would get 60%, whether you are in Calcutta University or in Delhi University. But in JNU, it's a liberal university as far as scoring is concerned, so the pressure is not really there. Okay, so the other thing was, if you scored a 60%, you would directly go into a PhD, which meant that if your chance of getting into JNU was during the MPhil stage, you literally had very little chance getting into JNU for the PhD only, if you had done your MPhil from somewhere else. And I was amongst the lucky few. I mean, I made it to the political science department, I made it to the sociology department as well, and there was literally one seat in which I could compete. So it can be that tough. Okay, and this was being done away with, and separate admissions for MPhil and PhD was being done, and this also led to seat kam ho jayega, and students will be discomforted. I mean, there was absolutely no reckoning for the fact that seats, I mean, people were, or students outside the university were already disadvantaged, because if they hadn't got into JNU with an MPhil, then they had no chance. Okay. The fourth thing was, and by now things were full blown. I was also in conflict with my department. I was being called a fascist. The usual, the things that are thrown at you, the usual muck. Although I don't know, I frankly don't know much about, when I became a fascist. I mean, yeah. Okay, so the thing was, I had pointed out, and I just want to take you to the next slide, where there's a photograph that I want to show, and this is what I actually highlighted. So you see, this is one of those romantic graffitis that are painted. That was painted on the walls of JNU, and this is the library wall of JNU, by the way. And you see, there's Marx, there's Engels, and there's Lenin. I mean, those figures are perhaps, I mean, those figures are fine. I mean, they wrote a lot. I mean, we need to read their books. But there was also Mao and Stalin, on those library walls. And I was like, there was a huge outcry at that point in time, because the vice chancellor had said that we can put a decommissioned tank on the campus of JNU in order to make the students feel what war is, and what is war, the gravity of wars, be proud of the wars that India has won. Okay, and there was suddenly a talk of militarization of the campus, violence on the campus, and all of this. And yet you have these two. One is the proponent of the great proletarian cultural revolution, and the other one is Stalin, of course, the architects of the gulags in Soviet Russia, and together it is estimated that they killed more people than Hitler has killed. Okay, and yet I am surprised that their posters were up on the walls of GNU. And incidentally, you would not find many people who actually know about the atrocities that these two men have committed on humanity. So if we and I'm surprised actually because even when I was growing up and even when I was in college, I didn't know the number of people these people killed. Because just think about what we are taught even in school. You get to read Anne Frank's diary, right? You get to read Anne Frank's diary, and you have a personal account of how terrible Hitler was, but nobody gets to read Solstein's, for instance, the Gulag Archipelago. So you don't have personally, you are not taught what these leftist tyrants had done to humanity, and these posters were still up. So I pointed this out, and this was at the height of the Doklam crisis, by the way. Okay, where you have this was at the height of the Doklam crisis, and you had Mr. Mao smiling at us from the walls of GNU. So I thought that this is very ironical, and therefore I decided to write a piece on it. By after writing this, I had my honeymoon with my friends was over. Now there was a strong divide between who's a friend and who's not a friend. I was a declared fascist on campus. Okay, so but I this was the time when I really thought that what do I want to do? Okay, do I fit in and remain what I am not, or what questions bother me, or do I move out and chart my own path? So I decided to move out and chart my own path, and I came to Bangalore. I got a job luckily, and I started teaching, and my submission of my PhD is still due. uh, so two more things. And once I came out of JNU and into Bangalore, I saw that things are not really changing. Okay, even if you look at the events of the last 2 years, you will see exactly how the left in India behaves. Okay, so again, I wrote an article that Chinese autocracy should be called out. This was in the Logical Indian over COVID-19, and this basically meant that you have the communists who or you have the leftists, who find out that intellectuals writing in, all the digital platforms and all the main newspapers that give them a lot of voice. Okay, and find out one article by any intellectual worth his or her salt who has actually said that the Chinese did not allow, okay, proper investigation as to how the virus originated in China. Okay, and it's a very, very legit research question. I mean, anybody would be asking that question, whether it originated in the markets, whether it originated in the lab, how did it originate? Okay, and they have stonewalled all efforts. I mean, even an IIT Delhi professor, published a fairly was his article had been accepted for publication, but then it was rejected. Okay, so how is it that does intellectual activity not get stifled by these activities? Of course they do, but do you hear the left talking about it? No. So you actually have instances when you hear of things that the left stifles, that the left is nepotistic. Okay, you struggle. There are so many incidences that you actually struggle to find out exact incidents. But I'm actually giving you the incidents where you can ask them some hard questions. All right, so did the left actually help in the research paper, or has it called out that no research has been allowed? No, although it's the most pressing question of our time, right? Also, has anyone spoken about the India China conflict, the Sino Indian conflict? Nobody. You will not see anyone condemning Chinese actions on the border, although many of them, will now be shedding copious tears on what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. Okay, they will not spend a word when it is about Tibet, when it is about Hong Kong. Okay, but but they will always have something to say when it's about Jammu and Kashmir, when it's about Palestine. Of course, these things should be said. Of course, things should be said about Jammu and Kashmir. Things should be said about Palestine, right? But you can't pick and choose. It's not a garden that the left owns. It's a garden that we all own. And if you are being, if you are cherry picking, then you will be called out. So there are things that the left chooses, and it picks up convenient things, okay, that suits its ideology, right? To be intellectual, but unfortunately, the intellectual tradition of India doesn't allow for this sort of intellectualism, frankly. Okay, and let's move over to the next slide. Yeah, now this is again, I said I am going to bring you some things, okay, that are not heard of outside JNU. Okay, this is one of those. This poster thankfully no longer remains. This is a poster which was just under this poster is the door, the entrance door to my department, and this is above, if this is above the entrance door, and I used to look at it every time I used to enter. Sometimes I felt like tearing it off, but I thought, that's something that the left does. Okay, it's not something that I would want to do. But have a look at this. You obviously, yada yada hi dharmasya glanirbhavati bharata. We know that very very important shlok from the Gita, that very important verse. It translated, it is like every time the universe is in chaos, or the universe is in disorder, I step out, and and then I encounter this chaos and this disorder, and bring about order out of this. I mean, of course, you can treat this literally in the Gita, or the philosophical debates, the philosophical interpretations of this need not be told. I mean, it is only something that we are actually too poor in India that we do not discuss religion in universities. Because if you go to Cambridge, if you go to Oxford, I mean, I'm not saying that they are great by definition, but I'm saying these are the great institutions that the left thinks are great. Okay, you take Princeton, you take Harvard, you take Stanford, wherever, you will always have departments of divinity studies, or you will have departments of religion studies. It's only in India that we don't have these. Okay, as a result of this, you can have this sort of a poster, okay, where obviously a tall politician is being depicted as Krishna. But he is Krishna, there's no doubt about it, because notice that peacock feather on his crown. Okay, the Gita is in his left hand. He's holding the lotus in his hand, and he's twirling the parliament with his right index finger, and he's stepping on human skulls, which is I was actually very surprised that only this sort of an interpretation of the Gita is possible in JNU. Because frankly, I mean, see, all sorts of interpretations are probably should be allowed in a, if you are to be intellectually free. Okay, but this is not intellectual freedom, because this is the only sort of interpretation which is allowed, and which is perpetrated in JNU. You try and do this with any other book, and the heavens will obviously fall. But we allow this to happen, okay, and we don't ask questions, and we don't ask, what do you have only this interpretation of the Gita, what do you know about Hindu philosophy? Because this, whether it is Sanatan Dharma, whether it's our religious intellectual tradition, we don't study it. It's as simple as that. It has been structurally, it has been erased, and it has been removed right since school till university. Okay, you, for instance, I'll give you a very small example. There's a lot of talk about the post-structuralists today, right? So from Foucault, Deleuze, all the Marxists are stuck at Foucault. Okay, then there's Barthes, there's Lacan, there is Levi Strauss, and all these French giants, right? And all of them actually take their work from Ferdinand de Saussure's course in general linguistics, which was published in I think in the second decade of the 20th century. But Ferdinand de Saussure actually takes most of his idea of general linguistics, or a branch, a new subdiscipline which emerged called semiotics, from the work of, deeply influenced by the work of Bhartrhari and his Vakyapadiyam, because Saussure's PhD was in Sanskrit, and this text was something that he deeply referred to. And yet we don't claim, okay, that this is, this is, there are obviously intellectual borrowings that have gone, that have gone unsaid, or that have gone unmarked. But de Saussure cannot be blamed for this, perhaps, because his book was published posthumously from his class lectures. So we don't know if, the lack of references to Bhartrhari is actually de Saussure's fault, or those who collected his lectures and published them, whether it's their fault. Okay. So I think so, the structure of treating and studying philosophy in India has been completely broken. I mean, its spine has been broken. And unfortunately, even now, we are not doing much about it at all. Okay, so that's a hint, perhaps, and that's a plea to my listeners and to whoever's there, that we need to do more, and we need to reclaim our intellectual traditions. It's very important. Not only reclaim, I mean, it's not all in the past. There are flourishing things that are happening currently, and that is what I'm going to talk about in my next slide. Yeah. So I will rush through this a little bit. Like I said, by now I'm sure I've been able to point out what leaving the left actually meant. So by now the divorce with left was more or less complete. Although I must say that I am very lucky to have a few friends from the left who remain my friends, and I have very great personal relationships with them, although I don't know if many of them would want to be seen with with me on the JNU campus, because they would get ostracized. Okay, so that's a problem. All right. So what have I been up to after leaving the left? And I think this is, if I invite suggestions on what more I could do, or these are just for interactions, if something if you want to know something about it. So one of the important things of being in this structured leftist sort of educational system is that you need to, in order to break out of it, you need to engage in self study, rather than group study. Okay, your syllabus is telling you to do something, your friends are reading particular texts, but one must have the curiosity. I won't say courage. One must have the curiosity to just to look at other things. Second, I think I have really gained a lot by not making the mistake that the leftists make, which is I actually read things that I thought are problematic. Okay, and while reading them, I actually came across things that the left themselves have written but don't talk about. Okay, for instance, if you read The Peasant Wars in Germany by Friedrich Engels, okay, who was Marx's collaborator, and who, by the way, was an industrialist. We all know that. So Marx, and it's not really talked about. Engels was a factory owner. I mean, not only a factory, but one of the most important factories in England. Okay, and where was he making that money from? I mean, there were no robots who were working in his factory, but there were working class people who were working in his factory. And what profits was he making? Was he a capitalist, or was he, what was he? I mean, it's something that is not very well talked about. And whenever something's not talked about, it's important to scratch the surface of it. So I mean, it's not known that Engels actually, I mean, they will not talk about this text. Okay, that The Peasant Wars in Germany is something that Friedrich Engels wrote, and it actually shows how, under Martin Luther, who was a religious figure, the peasants organized, okay, and revolted against the church and the nobility. So here you have religion literally acting as an ideology against capitalist exploitation. And you have a similar example of It's these are essays written by Kapil Kumar, and Saurabh Dubey has cited it also in his subaltern studies also, although he doesn't refer to them exclusively. Saurabh Dubey cites it. Kapil Kumar writes about how the Ramcharitmanas in the 1920s and the 1930s, okay, it becomes a revolutionary text by the interpretation of somebody called Ramchandra Baba, and how the peasants fight colonial exploitation and colonial taxation policies, okay, by rallying behind Ram. So you have these recurrent things that will not be taught to you, because it has to be, day in and day out, the lie has to be repeated that religion is only the opium of the masses, okay, and that it has no active, or it has no revolutionary potential. Okay, whether revolutionary, personal revolution or social revolution, that completely, it's a strict no-no where they will not go. So it's important to read them and find out what they are doing. I can also talk about other studies, but I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly move over to the other things. I've also been actively trying, okay, to understand what is it. I mean, okay, fine, the left has been in total control of education system. That is changing with the NEPA, hopefully, or the NEP. That is hopefully changing. But in the NEP, I don't find even one mention of how we are going to, the new knowledge that we are going to produce. Okay, you will focus on, Indian knowledge besides Western. But if your journals, okay, if 99.99% of your journals are either, okay, produced and edited by universities in the USA and the UK, okay, then why would they act as gatekeepers? Why would they allow you to talk about what you want to talk about? Okay, that's a question that we need to think. So we don't, our universities do not have publishing departments. You have Harvard University Press, you have Cambridge University Press, you have Oxford University Press, you have Edinburgh University Press, but do you have a Jawaharlal Nehru University Press? You don't. You had a Calcutta University Press, but do you produce good books? No. That's a major problem. Without publication, without dissemination of knowledge, if all your knowledge remains in your head and in interaction, you will again be doing what you have been accused of doing, which is to not write things down. I mean, if you write things down and you cannot publish it, then you are in deep trouble. So I think there is an urgent need to establish scholarly journals for publication. That's very important. Okay. Um, Second is, I mean, I urge, and I've been thinking about this, that there's a great need to establish translation infrastructures. So, for instance, the NEP talks about, that education in your mother tongue and in your mother language. All that is fine, but how many languages can I learn? Can I, I have learned Bengali. Okay, I can pick up Sanskrit and maybe Tamil also. But what about Telugu? Okay, you in India, you will always remain short of the vernacular, because the vernacular will always exceed you, because we are so culturally and linguistically rich. So therefore a centralized translation infrastructure needs to be formed, so that we can know what everybody else is learning, so that these infrastructures can actually write, or translate in the official languages, so that it's available for everyone to see. Okay, funding, this has been spoken about a number of times, and I will just skip it for want of time. Very importantly, you have seen in recent times that IIT Delhi is going to set up a campus in Dubai. I think this is a very important point. And what we need to do is we should gradually move away, or at least today, if you are a scholar, particularly a research scholar or a established scholar, whoever you are, if you're in the education profession, all roads basically lead to the US, and the US is not going to listen to you. Okay, and I will briefly tell you what Oriental modernism is, and from there we can make it out. The US is not going to listen to you, nor is the UK going to have an empathetic ear for you. So we need to change tack. We actually need to look towards the East. We need to look at the Eastern economies. We need to look at the Far Eastern countries with whom we have had cultural ties. Okay, and we need to establish educational engagement with them, because not only is it going to be intellectually productive, but it is also going to be productive in terms of expanding, okay, India's sphere of influence, as it is called in strategic studies or in international relations. And with the way with things are in South Asia, with China and India, I think that's a good thing to do. So this is the thing that I wanted to tell you, which is, see, the left, one of the ways in which it works is that it identifies itself as left. But whoever doesn't identify with it, it will call them the right. And the right has a very bad connotation with people like Mussolini, people like Hitler. I mean, obviously, Stalin and Mao have been left out of it because of reasons that I just discussed. But you don't want to be right. You don't, and more importantly, you do not wish that somebody else defines what you are. So if you ask me, who am I if I'm not the left? I would say I'm non-left. I would say I'm Bharatiya. I could even say I'm intellectually queer, right? I mean, there is so much that you are talking about queerness, this, that, which is very great. But please, I mean, let us engage in intellectual queerness as well. Okay, let's be, let's talk about different things. We don't need to pigeonhole ourselves to a particular ideology just because the left has decided to do it for itself. Okay, do not give them the right to define who you are. That's very important, I think. Whatever we have discussed so far, I think one of the most important things is to understand how this is a continuation, okay, of the colonial policy, and how this is, leftism is basically a cultural continuation of colonial rule, okay, or colonial logic. Let's say, let's not call it colonial rule, but it's a continuation of colonial logic. And why do I say that? So in the 1970s, 1978, if I'm not mistaken, to be precise, okay, Edward Said actually writes a book called Orientalism. Okay, and in that he basically says, how is it that you ruled over the? I'm simplifying it. How is it, because of want of time? How is it that you ruled over other people? Okay, of course you were exploiting them economically. Of course you were exploiting them militarily, but you also needed to justify to the rest of the world, okay, as well as justify to yourself that this sort of rule is actually required. Okay, so what did they do? They said, they spoke of civilizing mission and the white man's burden. We know that. But how would you engage in a civilizing mission? How would you talk about a white man's burden? For that, you needed to draw a picture of those who you are exploiting to be less than you. Okay, to draw a picture of those who are exploiting to be less than you, so that you can then prove that these people need us. Oh, okay, these people, for instance, pagans was heathen, okay, worshippers of many gods, right? So that, I mean, how is that bad, you would wonder. But at that point in time, to the Christian European colonial eye, it was something that was bad. Okay, so one of the primary ways in which the colonial policy worked was through Orientalism, that is, to make you seem bad. Okay, the other one was to offer yourself as the good guy. Okay, and this is where modernism comes in. So even when we talk about the word modern now, it appears as something positive. Okay, it appears as, in fact, I remember a book starting with the quote that it sees at the end of, I mean, on the back of a lorry, which says that "Unhe bhi to pata chale ki hum bhi modern hai." Okay, I think it's a book by Patricia Uberoy, which starts like that, which basically says that being modern is a good thing. All right, but where does this being modern come from? Being modern basically comes from the colonial, again, the colonial policy. Modern, being modern basically meant two things. One was you went into industrial capitalism. Okay, capitalism, fine, you can't, I mean, the world, I mean, world economies have been capitalist. I mean, there's no way out of it. But industrialization, reckless industrialization at the, which has led to climate change, right? I mean, we need to talk about these things. Who introduced it? Okay, just because it works for our material demands and our material goals doesn't mean it's right. Okay. Second is a deep disgust for religion. Okay, and actually not talking about the close interaction between religion and science. Now, this is something, the moment I say religion and science, we tend to go back to the Greeks, okay, or to the ancient Indians who were at the same time doing science and religion. No. But the father of modern science, Newton himself, was a deeply religious man. I mean, the point was, I mean, not only was it that he actually believed that there could be a philosopher's stone, and he was working in the dungeons to, to find the philosopher's stone, but he actually believed that the reason or what he was searching for, his laws of motion, and this is all documented. You can, I think either Oxford or Cambridge has that. Has that Newton's papers and Newton's documents, okay, where you can see that Newton actually thought of himself to be a man chosen by God, okay, to discover his rules on how everything, on earth acts so smoothly. Why is there day and night on regular intervals, and why, so he was fascinated, okay, by this orderliness of the planet, and he said that there must be someone who is doing this, and I am the chosen person to discover these things. Okay, so his motivation for physics were deeply religious, physics and mathematics. Okay, and this is again something that you will, I mean, is not public knowledge, because religion is something bad. We are going to only show that side of Newton, which talks of him as a physics master or something. And you take any religious, you take the figures of Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose, for instance, or Ramanujan, the mathematician, for instance. There's work by Ashish Nandi which discovers their religious side. Very interestingly, Rennie Thomas has very recently published an article that talks about the religious motivations of scientists in IISc in Bangalore, the Indian Institute of Science. Okay, how religion and science exist among scientists. Okay, and that's like recent, like 2 or 3 year old or 5 year old data. Okay, so this is something, these things will not fit into the structure of the modern, because the modern, okay, is based on the following four principles. Number one, it has a compartmentalized and evolutionary approach of history. That is, the past is always bad, and the present is very good, and the future is something where we can go and be better. So the past must be looked down upon. Okay, so that's why, I mean, this is something that the West can do very easily. America doesn't have a past, and the little past that they have is obviously of colonization. So the US can always say the past is bad because it holds true for them. Okay, Europe can also say the same thing, because if they look back at their past, okay, there are the Crusades, right? So I mean, they have done terrible things with religion, all right, and they want us or the rest of the world to share the burden of their guilt by saying that, it's history is always an evolutionary approach. The past is definitely bad, today is good, and the next stage is going to be better. So, and then there's the obsessive hostility towards religion. Okay, to this division between science and religion, which doesn't hold true, because I've just named some of the greatest figures in the world of science. I mean, not only from Newton, but we are also talking about IISc, which in the global rankings is probably in the top 100, somewhere in the 80s, right? Where scientists are religious. Now, what can you do about it? So either you change your knowledge because there is empirical evidence that talks otherwise, or you don't talk about the empirical evidence, which is something that the left does. Okay, and Rennie Thomas's article, by the way, is there in a. You can Google scholar him right now, and you'll find that it's not in some any other journal. It's in a fairly well-known in a well-known journal. So there's this obsessive hostility towards religion also, and there's materialism above abstraction. That's obviously whatever gives you material satisfaction in the immediate, whatever you can see. Okay, like you're blowing up mountains. Okay, you are you are digging deep fissures into the earth, right? So you are gaining control over nature by doing all these things. So you find that to be modern. I mean, imagine the amount of power that one must have felt when the nature that you were scared of, the lightning that you thought was religion, you were actually reproducing that on earth, and you started to think that, okay, now I have that power. Okay, so this is materialism over abstraction. And legitimization of violence. Okay, some sorts of violence is legitimate, like the violence that you carry out on your on the natives, okay, is legitimate because they need to be schooled, they need to be disciplined. And if you see, I mean, if you go to the next, let's stay on this slide. Sorry, if you see, these principles of modernism is something that even the left follows. Okay, so compartmentalized and evolutionary approach to history. How is it? So their sense of history is that at the very beginning there was primitive communism. The world was communist. Okay, then came war societies or tribal societies. Okay, there were tribalism. There was something of a mere, there fisticuffs used to happen, but it was not that bad. Okay, then there was a worsening situation and it became feudalism. Further worsening situation, capitalism. Okay, then there will be further, I mean, there will be some sort of a good thing, dictatorship of proletariat in the next historical epoch, which of course is a legitimization of violence because you call for the open annihilation of the bourgeoisie, okay, which has led to, again, like I said, Stalin's Russia and communist China, Mao's China. So there's legitimization of violence that you do. And finally, there will be scientific communism or the real communism in society. So again, in the case of modernism, you have things becoming bad to good, whereas in the communist scheme, things become bad, 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 worse, worse, and then suddenly there will be, a revolution and things will change. So you have that evolutionary approach of towards history, obsessive hostility towards religion, modernity. It talks only about science, tries to erase the religious motivations behind science, or alongside science, how religion and science actually are not that separate. It tries to erase that. Classical Marxists obviously will always talk about religion as the opium of the masses. Okay, legitimization of violence, I already gave you the example. The native needs to be schooled. On the other hand, you have the dictatorship of the proletariat, you have the class enemy who you have a legitimate right to go out against and therefore bully or even kill. So this is I at the initial stage, I had started with a question that how is it that I came from leftist Kolkata to liberal Delhi, and both are at loggerheads, right? Because economically they don't agree. One wants a certain kind of an economic environment, the other wants the opposite kind of an economic environment, whereas markets and states and their interactions and concern. But culturally, if you see, they follow those four principles. They follow those four principles, and that is precisely why this hyphenation has emerged between them. Okay, and this is what I wanted to say. I think I'm right on time, and thank you very much. I would like to end here. If there are any questions, I would love to take them.
Namaste, Arunodaji.
Namaskar.
Very insightful updates and insights. So, my question was, whenever a nationalistic person talks about something which is, pro-nation and pro-right-wing, then there is a usual argument by the leftists, and they call it is jingoism, and then try to, shut them down by their, manifesto, or by their, template. So, is there any ready reckoner for the people to, give them back a tooth and nail? Is there any ready reckoner which we can keep handy and, press where the things will
Well,
be clear?
I think the ready reckoner is that they don't understand the meaning of nation and nationalism in the first place. Okay, because nation and nationalism is very different from jingoism. Jingoism is a being hypersensitive about one's nation. Okay, and I don't think India at all falls into that category. If you want to have a ready reckoner, you would probably want to read, or you would probably want to look at a few works on the idea of on the idea of nation. And in this case, I would certainly suggest the works on Sri Aurobindo, the works by Sri Aurobindo on national culture in India. So there's his book on Renaissance. It's called Renaissance in India or something like that. Okay, you could read that book. The other one would be Makarand Paranjpe's, edited works of Vivekananda. because Vivekananda's works runs into volumes, okay, and it's very, very difficult. You can spend a whole lifetime talking about it. So I would say that Professor Paranjpe's edited, selected readings of Vivekananda is a good place to start.
Really good talk, sir. I wanted to ask about the fact that they are so set on the separation between religion and science. How did they end up having divinity departments in their universities then? And if people in India were so influential who wanted to set up India in a certain way, emulating the West, why did they not do the same in India?
I think the second question is pretty fascinating, but I'll try and answer the first one. I'm not sure what the history of the setting of divinity studies departments in the university in the universities in the West were. I am presuming that Oxford and Cambridge are very, very old universities. So I'm presuming they already had divinity studies departments, okay, and the US was just an extension of Europe, through the process of settler colonization. And when they set up universities, probably they were continuing with the tradition of having religious studies departments in the West. This is my educated guess. I haven't read any book on this, or I haven't. I'm not I'm not conversant with the history of departments of religion or divinity studies in the West. Why did we not do it? Okay, for that, I would actually refer you to a book called Rakesh Bhattabyal. Okay, he is also a professor in JNU of media studies and history. He has come out with a book called The Making of JNU, and there you would see how the education you see in the 1970s, roughly in 1971, if I'm not mistaken, India and Soviet Russia, we kind of signed the Treaty of Friendship, and with that, the communist ideology's takeover of the Indian state was pretty much sealed. And if you look at the ministers, if you look at Nehru himself, he was deeply influenced by socialist thought, and those who came after it were, I mean, leftist of some hue or the other, and for all of them one thing that matters is that religion is the opium of the masses. So you literally had no political initiative, or you had no favorable policy that would actually engage in the study of religion in an intellectual and philosophical manner. As a result of which it has often been reduced to ritual. But however, I mean, there's a point of there's a positive point that I must mention, and which is, if you look at publishers, if you look at private institutions, so one of them is Motilal Banarasi Das Publishers, for instance. There you would find a lot of scholarly work still taking place, and they're publishing very, very good books on religion and Indian intellectual tradition. So Motilal Banarsi Das is one place. The other place that I also follow is Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. So you could look up Swami Medhananda, and because he's a brilliant scholar, okay, a contemporary of Jonathan Kennedy, and I mean, he educated again. I mean, the left would, of course, like him looking at his bio, because he's educated in Oxford, Cambridge, and his PhD in philosophy is from University of California, Berkeley. But then he will say things which will not be music to their ears. Okay, so a lot of private places, private institutions have, of course, managed to continue the tradition of religious discourse in India. Although I think I've been able to give you a quick insight on why this was not possible in the public university system in India.
It was amazing. By the way, were you ever called a right-wing reactionary?
Oh yeah, a number of times.
Okay. Okay. I had a similar journey as yours, but not through educational institutes, but via corporate, which is
Okay.
much more amazing.
Hmm.
I live in Bangalore as well. Maybe we should
Okay.
connect sometime.
Sure.
I don't have a question. I just want to add one of my points over here. And I'm not a researcher, but I believe that leftist people, it's not that they don't want to talk about religion, and they just believe in that saying religion is the opium of the masses. They use it to take people away from whatever belief system they have. But I think it is particularly very, very targeted towards pluralistic religions like Hinduism, if I can call that, or Sanatana Dharma, because I believe that the entire leftist philosophy is based on the binaries, and
Yeah.
that is why they just can't deal with a pluralistic, belief system like Sanatana Dharma, and that is why special antagonism towards that, and that is what my experience has. I just wanted to add that.
I mean, I think you use an excellent word, which is very frequent in the lectures that I give in the university, which is binary. It is true. I mean, modernism is actually based on a binary, and so is leftism. Okay, and I mean, if we meet, we can actually discuss this in greater detail. I mean, one of the best binaries. I mean, one of the most fundamental binaries of leftism is, this. Working class and bourgeois divide. Okay, whoever is not working class or bourgeois is, is either petty bourgeois or a sack of potatoes. I mean, completely rejected. So I always tell my students that the first polarizer of society is no other person than Karl Marx, because he refuses to see any other economic class. Okay, and he divides society neatly into two halves, which is the bourgeois and the proletariat. And I then tell them, go out into the streets, okay, and ask the person who is selling, something at the traffic signal, okay, and ask the hairdresser on the traffic signal if the hairdresser would change his place with the fellow who is selling books on at the traffic signal. They won't, although they both belong to the working class, if we go by Marx's scheme of things. Okay, but they won't. This is because society is not divided into two classes. It cannot be imagined like that. Okay, it's just for the purpose of polarization. Yeah. So binary is a very good word.
Recently, there was a lot of flag created in the left wing when I guess Professor Pandit was appointed as the vice chancellor of JNU, and the bedrock on which their argument was based upon was that she doesn't fit into the cultural and academic tradition or environment of JNU. So there would be a friction between students and VC. So what are your comments on that?
Well, see, I'm not I'm sitting in Bangalore for the last 2.5 years. I'm slightly off campus for a long time. So, I'm not qualified enough to comment on that comment. But then, I mean, to take what you are saying, I mean, who defines what the culture and ethos of JNU is? I mean, that's the first question. And that I think if these comments are made, I think they need not, because those who make these comments are not credible people. I mean, I'll tell you, the same set of people, if this comment, and if you are saying it must be true, the same set of people actually said that COVID is a conspiracy by populist right-wing governments to lock up people in their homes and do whatever they like. Okay, so it's high time that we don't take these comments very seriously, because these are not intellectual, academic, or informed comments. These are comments of hate, and these are basically comments of hate to put people down by not so smart people. So we shouldn't react to them.
Arunodaya, I really enjoyed your class because, I actually was a journalist, but a tech journalist. And then I volunteered in the Aurobindo Ashram when my daughter started studying there. So my introduction to humanities or, history and all of that is through Sri Aurobindo.
Uh-huh.
And of course,
right.
And now I'm doing history in the history curriculum for an IGCSE school for
right.
class 8.
Right.
And, anyone who's learned history formally I have a huge clash with, and I never know where that thing is coming from, where the resistance is coming from. Because, we're teaching school kids, and what we're teaching is well researched but extremely basic questions to help them understand what their country is all about, where they're coming from, to understand their place. But the way you broke things down, like, for example, I would have very difficult time to say that history is cyclical. To me, that's so obvious. And things like, for example, Renaissance, you say agricultural revolution somewhere. Now, from journalism, I know that a traditional Indian farmer, thousands of years produced more and traded. So you now, it's like, can't you see? I mean, like, we drawing parallels. And okay, now that's what I wanted to tell you. But the question that I have to ask is, as a mother, my daughter's taken humanities, okay, and I see her taking psychology, sociology, and design. And I'm kind of afraid that she's going to get caught in this thing, because they don't really understand. They don't understand. I mean, it took me a while to understand, because I used to think, I'm a science student, so I used to think humanities people are intellectual, so you can say whatever you want. I mean, it took me a long while to understand the resistance, because I saw that, it was so bizarre, because we were in an ashram school where people came for the liberal thing, and then they would kind of pass snide remarks on the ashramites and teachers, saying, oh, these are saffronites, don't take what this is seriously. But you've come, if you were left, then you should have gone into a government school with 50 kids in a class. This was an ashram school funded by the devotee. Anyway, now the question that I want to ask you is, are scholars like you who've understood this thing, is there a movement that you see to Indianize psychology, sociology, or, to create these kind of humanities in the Indian framework mind?
No, it's a brilliant question, because I don't know where to start, because I've just been reading Freud and Freud's correspondence with Girindra Bose, who was the first psychoanalyst of India. In the 1930s, I was reading his works. Also, Sri Aurobindo's, there's someone called Indra Sen, who actually writes about Sri Aurobindo's psychology, and Indra Sen was a professor of psychology at Delhi University. So it's not coming from, it's basically coming from a professor in a university. So I think there, and if you take sociology, there are the works of, there are just so many works. Okay, there is Radha Komal Mukherjee. There is Binoy Kumar. There are so many. G.S. Ghuriye, of course. And all of them have been condemned to the past by saying that these are saffronites, or they talk about religion in sociology, which must not be talked about. Although when the West talks about religion, for instance, Clifford Geertz, okay, we lap it up. It's even there in our syllabus. Okay, but we'll not read our Indian authors, because we suffer from that colonial hangover even till date. Having said that, to Indianize, well, something, if I wish it could be done, and I'm sure that it is being done. I am someone who is not yet a full scholar. I am still training as an academic, and I would, of course, if there is something like this going on, and I'm sure something like this is going on, I would love to contribute to it. It's just that I don't know where these things are happening. Maybe within some time we'll get to know, and if we can just get in touch, I would love to actually talk about these things more.
So Vidyaji, I don't know if you're listening, but if you can just inculcate the kids to think not in terms of binary, but in terms of at least three, I think they will become open, because I have seen that it is the binary thing. It is just which we see very often in our society, which is the problem.
Arunodaji, just a last comment from Aditi ji, and she wants to know your thoughts on it. She says, I feel calling ourselves conservatives is just as inaccurate as calling ourselves right wing.
Yeah, absolutely.
owing
I
to
agree
the
with that.
particular origin and context within which this ideology arose, changed over time, and the framework it's being used within now. Please share your thoughts as to whether this term is appropriate or not to describe in the Indian context.
No, I don't think any term which is foreign, and this conservative liberal, I don't think it fits into the Indian context, because just like Indian society, Indian intellectual thought is also extremely pluralistic. Okay, extremely pluralistic, and plural rather. So this term that has emerged somewhere else, and as you rightly point out, is it has a different context and has a different intellectual background. I think if we try to put it on us, we'll try to fit into that concept rather than that concept accurately describing who we are. So I think let the left, if it is okay, the left identify themselves as the left, but whoever is non-left, I think, should be free to choose what words to use to identify themselves. Like I said, non-left Bharatiya. It could even be conservative or right wing. Some people may actually feel that no, I think what the word right actually describes me good, describes me well, or the word conservative describes me well. So there should actually be freedom to be what you want to be and to think the way you want to think, as long as the such thought is rigorous and based on solid argument, not fantasy.